Excellent on there. Oh, whoops. Okay. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and get started. By the way, before I forget, you guys know that tomorrow is a holiday. Monday is a holiday. So if you have any Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday classes, Monday is a holiday. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and kind of just a little bit of review from last time on here. So here's a squat, right? And a squat is going to have, if I were to say a squat consists of 3 phases of movement, true or false? True. Okay. Why is it true? What are the 3 phases?
Isometric, and isokinetic.
Nope, not quite. Those are 3 types of movement. So it's 3 ways we produce force. So think about the movement. 2 of them are up here.
Eccentric, and an isometric.
Yeah, eccentric, concentric, isometric. So in a squat, the eccentric phase is lowering, right? I've got weight on here. I mean, there's 2 ways to get that weight to the ground. One is to crush me, right? Right? And the other is to slowly bring it down, right? Control the weight, right? Because gravity, right? Gravity is always pulling us down, right? A weight that is lifted gets pulled down by gravity. So I want to slow that and control it by doing an eccentric contraction. So that eccentric contraction is going to be the glutes lengthening, the quads lengthening, tibialis and what am I saying? Gastrocnemius lengthening. So as I am doing that squat, right, quadriceps is lengthening, right? So it's producing force, but instead of shortening, actin and myosin, right, they're holding together, they're lengthening in order to control that weight. That make sense? So when we do strength training, we really like to emphasize a lot of eccentric. You actually produce about 1.3 times as much force with eccentric loading than you do with concentric. So oftentimes we'll tell clients to slow down. I had a student today that was doing a squat, curl, overhead press, and so I wanted him on the eccentric slower, right? Fast up, slow down. Fast up, slow down. So eccentric, hold, isometric, muscle is generating force, but there's no movement, right? I'm not going anywhere. The joints are in a stable position. Concentric, muscle shortens. So those are the 3 phases of that movement. So I did put 2 phases up there because oftentimes we come down, we come up, we come down, we come up. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
So like isometric would be like, let's say you're doing a workout and you're like doing like time over tension. Would that be isometric?
Yeah, so same sort of thing. In other words, the muscle is still developing tension, but there's no movement during that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
A good
Okay.
example of that would be like an anti-rotation exercise. So with a lateral walk and a cable is pulling you horizontally. So you're still under tension, right? But there's no movement in the joints.
Yeah. So here, try this with, so Diego and I are gonna demonstrate something. So speaking of anti-rotational, so both of us put our hands out here, we're gonna oppose one another, right? So if we're opposing one another, in this case, on the right side for me, my right oblique, right, quadratus laborum, they're contracted, but nothing's happening, right? No movement is taking place. Make sense? And for Diego would be the contralateral side, right? His left side, sorry.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's an isometric move, right? There's no movement. You know, in other words, we have two opposing forces, so there's no movement. Okay. Somebody want to give me an example of this type of eccentric, concentric, isometric that's not a squat? Go ahead, Adrian.
You could do like a dumbbell or like an incline bench press.
Okay,
When you're coming down eccentric,
uh-huh,
you hold it for like a second, it's the isometric, and then it comes up, it's the concentric.
uh-huh, yeah, exactly, perfect, great example. What about a push-up? Right, so on, yeah, go ahead, Carmen.
I was thinking like a Superman, like where you start on the floor, you lift up, you're holding it, and then you come back down.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Similar to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so, same thing in a push-up, right? In a push-up, if I'm starting, sorry, I'm not gonna climb up on a desk to do it. Here, I'll do it here for you. Right, so on a push-up, right, so I'm in the up phase, as I lower, eccentric, hold, isometric, concentric on the up phase. Same sort of thing. Okay, so we use this quite a bit. So in this case, again, the muscle's acting like a decelerator in the eccentric phase to slow the influence of gravity, right? And then it's acting as a strut when you hold, right? No movement. And then it's acting as an accelerator, in this case on the up phase.
What about an exercise that uses it the opposite way? Concentric, isometric, eccentric. Anybody? Chuck squat,
There's like a main plate,
hang clean,
yeah.
go ahead.
Um, It's like you're starting on the bottom, and then you're not,
What's the motion you have to do? What type of contraction you have to do to raise the bar? You're right on it.
kind of like a deadlift at first.
Yeah, there we go. So which is concentric, right?
Yeah, and then when you isometric would be when you're like starting to go up.
Yep, exactly. Into the catch phase, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to catch the bar. And then,
The eccentric is when you do the push, where the
lowering, right? So the
Yeah.
squatting position. So once you catch, so you're right on it, right? So concentric, okay, eccentric or isometric, right? Isometric, concentric still, isometric, eccentric. Yeah. So yeah. So it's the contractions happen in various times. So you could either start with concentric or an eccentric. Or an isometric. Yeah, good job.
Yeah, so they, you know, they don't have to go in this order. They can go in a variety of orders, right? But those are the three sort of phases where the muscle shortens, or the muscle lengthens, or the muscle develops tension but doesn't change length. Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
So then what would be an example if you start off with the isometric first?
Like if I wanted to do a plank,
Oh,
let's say I go from a plank to a push-up.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So I can start in that plank position as an isometric, and then lower eccentric, come up as a concentric. Okay, so there's our isometric on there. Okay, let's do this. So we're gonna start doing some relationships, and this is gonna be, we're gonna kind of give you the big picture as opposed to all the nitty gritty details on this. So length tension relationship. So what do you need to know about that? You need to know that there's an optimal muscle length where actin and myosin, myofilaments in the sarcomere, right? Actin and myosin, right? You guys remember that actin and myosin connect with one another? Is that making sense? Right? You have to have calcium. So the brain tells the bicep to contract, right? Signal comes down to the bicep. That electrical signal gets converted into a chemical response. Basically, calcium is released in the bicep muscle. That calcium unlocks the binding sites on actin. Myosin reaches out and grabs actin and connects. And the muscle shortens or it lengthens. It shortens or it lengthens. So there's an optimal length where you're going to develop the most force. And you probably have all realized that. Let's say you do a bicep curl. And you're doing dumbbells. Does it seem like it's easier in some parts and it's harder in others? Yeah, that's this going on. So basically, what this is saying is that if actin and myosin are too far apart, they're barely overlapping, your ability to generate force is significantly reduced, right? So if the sarcomere length is quite long, so here's the thick one here, this is myosin. The thin lines here, this is actin. These are the little cross bridges, right, that reach out and grab one another. Right, does that make sense? So as actin and myosin are further away, there's very little place for them to connect. So this is one of the reasons why, has anybody ever heard something about, you shouldn't do static stretching prior to lifting?
Yeah.
Anybody ever heard that one? Yeah. That's why. Right, so, well, it's not that you shouldn't do it, it's just that oftentimes what some studies have shown is that you can diminish force output by having that muscle be too elongated, right? Actin and myosin don't have enough, there's not enough teeth basically to grab onto here, right? That makes sense? The same thing happens when they're overlapped all the way, right? I contracted as far as I can go. I've maxed out that contraction. I can't get any more movement, right? There's just nowhere to go. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's basically an optimal length. And that optimal length is where we're going to produce the most force. So that's one of the reasons why we talked last time about biomechanics. So here's an example. Anybody ever done a pec fly? Right? Anybody ever done that motion? So there's typically a machine, right? You see it in most gyms, pec fly machine. Pec fly machine, you'll see a lot of folks where they'll put the handles instead of here, they'll put the handles where they're way back here. Right? And so in this case, it's so hard to move it. It's so hard. I'm doing all this work. And then I bring it forward. Have you ever seen that? This is a very mechanically poor position. And it's a poor position because I've stretched that pectoralis major. I've made it more difficult for actin and myosin to contract. Does that make sense? Because I've stretched that muscle. So I work with a lot of folks, they're straining. I usually will ask, is your shoulder ever bother you? Oh, yeah, all the time. Well, let's do a little experiment here. Let's move the dial on the thing. So you're starting from this position, hand slightly in front of the shoulder. When they start from this position, same weight, I always get the same response. That is so much easier. Yes, because you've started at a more optimal position for actin and myosin. So now I say, and of course most people love this, put more weight on. I can lift more weight, ego, yay, right? Because now we put more weight on. Oh my God, I can lift, it's easier. Yeah, because you've put the muscle in an advantageous position for it to do its thing. That making sense? So when we look at mechanics, we look a lot at that type of thing. Are we putting actin and myosin at their most beneficial place to be able to produce force? Right, so, and oftentimes when we put people in this position, you get joint injury. Because the joint now, structures that are not intended to lift, ligaments, tendons, bear more of the load. And so then, so we see a lot of folks where, especially shoulders, and oftentimes how they lift is the source of that pain. Get with you.
No, that was exactly what I was gonna say, about, we always talk about training the muscle, not the joint. That's the primary, one of the primary things here in this lengthening tension relationship, that you want to put the stress on the muscle because you can regenerate muscle tissue. Muscle tissue has a lot of blood flow, right? So joints and ligaments, very little, right? So once the joint goes, it is gone.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's very difficult. So that's and it goes into stagnant to the muscle balance and imbalance.
Yeah. So is that making sense about those length tension relationships? So now where that comes into play is when you have, oh, sorry, did I ruin your photo
No,
there?
you're good, you're good.
Bigfoot going across, yeah. So one of the things that comes up is where then, so now you have people that get these altered relationships, right? And so here's balance, right? Here's bicep, tricep. Here is gluteus maximus, hip flexor. Here is quadriceps, hamstrings, right? We have these synergistic muscles that work on a joint. Everybody with me on that one? Okay. If they're exerting equal force, right, or they have the same level of flexibility, the joint, if it's supposed to be at a 90-degree angle, is at a 90-degree angle, right? No issues. But if I overwork one muscle in that group and underwork another, I can create this imbalance. We see this a lot with folks where massive bicep, not so massive tricep, and you'll see their arms. This is as much as they can extend them, right? So their arms in a like anatomical position, instead of being fully extended, slightly bent. Make sense? So their resting position interferes with the joint. That makes sense? So then we start to see these imbalances. And so when we start to talk about assessments, and those of you in the 143 class, we did that Tuesday, right? So now we're starting to look at posture because that reveals many of these imbalances. So then we can say, hey, this muscle that's too tight, let's loosen this up. This muscle that's too weak, let's strengthen it so that we can get to this. Does that make sense? Yeah. So as the trainer, you're looking for those kinds of imbalances. Okay, so in blue, we have this term up here, altered reciprocal inhibition. It's a mouthful, right? So let's break it down. So reciprocal inhibition. Anybody ever heard that term? So this is a term that we talk about with flexibility all the time. Reciprocal inhibition. So remember when we had you stick your arm out? Let's try it again. So stick one arm out, contract the bicep and the tricep simultaneously, right? Got to consciously do it. Can you move your arm? No, can't bend the elbow, right? Two opposing forces. If I want to bend my elbow, brain says, bend right elbow. Excuse me. Brain says, flex right elbow, right? Let's use the correct term. Flex the right elbow. Send the signal to the bicep. Bicep says, got a nerve signal, calcium gets released, actin and myosin connect, they shorten the bicep, I bend the elbow. But at the same time, the brain sends a signal to the tricep and says, we're going to be flexing down there, so don't oppose this, relax. So that's what reciprocal inhibition is. It's the brain telling one muscle to contract and telling its opposing muscle to relax. Make sense? So back to this example, bicep contract, tricep relax. Hip flexor contract, gluteus relax. Quadriceps contract, hamstring relax. Make sense? If you did not have reciprocal inhibition, right, we would have no fluid movement. So because you have two muscles that act in opposition on a joint, and that's really what reciprocal is, right? So anybody know the term reciprocal or reciprocate? You guys do it all the time, right? Somebody says, hi, Annabelle. She reciprocated, right? She said hi, right? So that's that reciprocal back and forth, right? Back and forth is basically reciprocate, right? Somebody does something nice for you, you do something nice for them. You reciprocate the gesture. Make sense? So that's reciprocal inhibition, right? The agonist contracts, and in response to that contraction, the antagonist relaxes. Okay, we're okay on that one? So sometimes that gets altered. And sometimes that relationship that's really good, beneficial, everybody's happy, gets altered. This chronically contracted muscle sends a signal to its opposite that sort of, for lack of a better term, kind of deadens it, right? It gets it in an inhibitory signal is the technical term. So what we see for people, especially, we're seeing this in the pandemic all the time. Sit, 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 sit. I mean, yesterday I was at a computer for, I think it was 12 hours. It's like, you know, I mean, I got up and I moved around, but, you know, still, you know, it's like, oh, God's sakes. You know, I went and worked out, came back, sat for the computer, right? Okay. And then I did watch an episode of Inventing Anna. Anybody seen that on Netflix? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I watched it. Anybody watch Ozark? Oh, the body count in Ozark is very high, very high. So, you know, don't, if you don't, you know, yeah, gotta be careful of that one. Anyway, bottom line is, I watched that, and, you know, I don't know why I said that. Anyway, go ahead. So here we go. Sit, sit, sit. The hip flexor is in this flex position all day, right? It's in this flex position. It sends a signal basically to the gluteus that inhibits the gluteus. It kind of weakens it. It's sort of, have you ever heard anybody say, let's wake the glutes up? Right? What they're talking about is that inhibited relationship. So we see people that have weakened gluteus muscle because the hip flexor is tight. Tight hip flexor can send an inhibitory response to the gluteus, which weakens it. So now, right, now we're back on campus next week, right? So we have students that are walking upstairs. What you're going to see is people that have weakened gluteus, the hamstring starts doing more work for hip extension. So hip extension is the role, it's the prime mover is gluteus maximus. But when gluteus maximus has been sort of turned off, for lack of a better term, the hamstring says, well, we still got to get that hip back. Okay, I'll do it. So where hamstring should be a synergist, hamstring might start to take over the role of prime mover. And now we get more imbalance. That making sense? Mm-hmm. So lots of times we have to actively have clients contract the glutes, right? consciously recruit the glutes because of this alteration. So, your body's pretty cool. It figures out, sometimes for better or for worse, what to do here. Okay. So remember how we talked about your muscle can work as a accelerator, right? Concentric contraction. It can work as a decelerator, right? Eccentric contraction. It can work as a strut, right? Isometric contraction. It can also work like a spring, right? We got our friend the Slinky up here. So your muscles act like a spring, right? So if I'm doing squat jumps, right? Concentric, I'm up in the air. Eccentric, I come back down. And that quadricep and the glutes, they quickly stretch. So when I jump up in the air and I come down, quickly stretches at the quadriceps, which then, boom, muscle contracts back and causes me to jump back up. So technically, what that is referred to is the stretch response. Anybody ever? You've always gone to the doctor, right? You go to the doctor, right? They have you sit on that thing. You put your knee up. What's the doctor do? Right, they're testing your reflexes, right? They get that prehistoric looking thing, right? It's always the little arrow. What do they call that? Like a tomahawk sort of thing. I think it's 2020. No, something better. I mean, come on. Of course, it's probably one of those things. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So they get out the hammer looking thing, bang, they hit you here, you kick your leg out, hopefully. So they're testing that neural reflex. They're testing, are all the connections there? When the muscle contracts, hamstring has to relax. So they're testing, does that neural system function the way it should? So that stretch reflex is very much involved where your muscle works as a spring. So, basically, in this case, the quadricep is lengthened, gluteus is lengthened, and when they're lengthened, boom, they snap back to their original length. That drives her up. She comes back down, lengthened, boom. Right? So can anybody think of, where do we use this? Where do we use this stretch shortening cycle? Knowing that when a muscle is stretched, it wants to contract back to its original length. You all know that anyway, right? Rubber band. I stretch it, there's a lot of tension on it, boom. It comes back to its original length. I stretch it, I stretch it, I stretch it, boom, comes back to its original length. Your muscles are exactly the same way. Right? Do you think this is important? Yeah, most of yeah. The answer on most of those things, if a teacher says it's important, always say it. You're going to be right like 90% of the time, right? So, or the other question is if they ask you something, generally the real response is it depends. Right? That gets you out of everything. Okay. All right. So here's the deal on that one. Basically, it's a mechanism. Right. So we said before when I do static stretching. Right, I stretch to a place short of pain, and my body is giving me a signal to stop, right? I get that quivering, and then I can stretch a little further because the hamstring loosens up. That's the Golgi tendon organ. Remember, it's responsible for tension, and it inhibits the muscle. So basically, it's going to allow that muscle to relax a little bit. But the bottom line is that when I do that, think about this. Ever seen anybody stretch like this? Right? No. Right? Fast stretching. Right? So you might see it where, somebody's doing a hamstring stretch. Right? I'm stretching and then the muscle automatically says, ooh, keep that up and you're going to tear me. So I'm going to contract your back. So this is a protective, it's also one of the ways that we do explosive movement but it's also a bit of a protective mechanism. So I don't stretch too far and tear that muscle. If you've ever had a muscle tear, they're painful, extremely painful. So this stretch shortening, think about this. If I wanted to hit a tennis ball is coming at me, right? How do you hit a tennis ball? What's the first thing in tennis? Anybody ever taken tennis? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Anton.
I think they teach you to get like hit the ball like right up the side of the body, like
Mm-hmm.
before back behind.
Anybody ever heard racket back? So a tennis teacher will tell you, if I'm waiting for that serve, as soon as I can figure out if it's a forehand or a backhand, racket back. Why is the racket back? Because it stretches pectoralis, it stretches biceps, it stretches rectus abdominis, it's going to stretch serratus anterior. I'm putting all these muscles on stretch so that I can bring my forehand through quickly. Anybody ever play golf? Right? Why do I bring the club back? Right? I bring the club back because it stretches the left side of my body, so now those muscles can fire, boom, and I can bring that forward. So we use this all the time. We precede explosive movements with stretch because a muscle that is stretched will contract faster and with more force. Make sense? So if we want explosive movements, we call that kind of the preparation phase. Okay, is that making sense? Yeah. So again, muscle has 4 actions: accelerator, decelerator, strut, spring. Make sense? Okay. Okay, we're not going to go through this too much, but basically, here's what you need to know. Force velocity curves. Basically, force velocity curves are basically looking at when I'm doing a concentric or an eccentric contraction, how much force is generated. You probably all know this anyway. You didn't need the graph to tell you this. So basically what this is saying is that if I'm doing a concentric movement, I generate the force I generate is strong early, weaker late. So I produce less force as the muscle shortens. Right? That makes sense, right? Because actin and myosin have overlapped where they can't produce any more force. That makes sense? So basically, as the velocity of the concentric contraction increases, its ability to generate force decreases. That's because actin and myosin are already overlapped. So basically, quick. Right? That's why in a concentric phase, we oftentimes do quick movements. Slow movements in the eccentric phase, quick movements in the concentric phase. On the flip side, as the velocity of an eccentric movement increases, its ability to produce force also increases. So basically that's essentially a protective mechanism. So think about that squat. If I go down slowly in the squat, the muscle stretches, but it stretches slowly. But if I go down quick in the squat, that muscle stretches quickly. Make sense? And when it stretches quickly, boom, force gets produced. Right? So basically actin and myosin get in their proper positions. So basically just know that the speed at which an eccentric or a concentric movement takes place impacts how much force can be developed. So again, back to my student in the fitness class this morning, I have yet to make an impression in this way. This student is repeating the class from last semester. I must have said 100 million times last semester, slow down, quick up. Slow down, quick up. He's just quick all the time. But I'm trying to accentuate the eccentric movement. And it's also a safety issue. So I've made little headway, but I'm going to continue to work on it. Okay, force couple relationships. Basically, this is looking at muscles that are synergistic. That means they work together, right? You have a team. Anybody ever been on a team and the team has really great synergy? You know what that word is? Synergy? Yeah, if you've ever been on a team, athletic team, work team, group of people, your boy or Girl Scout or whatever, a group of people that come together, when they have good synergy, right? And that means everybody's doing their job. I know my job, I do my job. It just flows. Oh, it's a beautiful thing to experience and then watch. You know, if you go into coaching and you go into group coaching, man, you love a team with good synergy. I mean, it's awesome. It's a thing of beauty. I mean, it can be magical, frankly, is to watch a group of people come together. They know their job, they know their goal, they're all working together. Their communication is just crisp and sharp. Fantastic. Awesome thing to watch. Okay. So that's what this is. So this is basically where you have synergistic muscles that work together to produce movement. So basically, internal and external obliques. They work together, they're synergistic to turn the trunk. Upper trapezius, lower portion of the serratus anterior is down here, right? So serratus anterior, they work to laterally flex the shoulder, right? So they work together to do that. Gluteus maximus, quadriceps, gastrocnemius, soleus produce hip, neck, ankle, and knee flexion. In other words, all the muscles work together for the production of the proper movement, and they're said to be working in proper force. These are just what we call force couple relationships, right? Groups of muscles, they work together to produce quality movement. They're all doing their job correctly, right? Sometimes we have force couple relationships where somebody's not quite in sync. Somebody's not doing their part of the job just right. Make sense? Right, so you have muscles that work together on here. Okay, basically this is about levers. You guys use levers all the time. You may or may not be aware of it, but you use levers all the time. So this is a way that we can make exercises more challenging, or we can make them less challenging so that we can help somebody with what they're doing. So I have a class of, say, 20 people. We're going to do planks. The more advanced student might do a plank on all fours, lifting one leg. So now it's 3 points of contact. A less advanced student might do a plank just forearms and feet. A less advanced student might do knees and forearms. Does that make sense? So we can shorten or lengthen levers to make something more or less challenging. Okay, so here's what we're looking at here. Here's shoulder abduction. So in this case, I'm abducting the shoulder. I'm raising the weight so the weight is superior to my head, right? So if we look at that, the maximum amount of angle here and the maximum amount of compressive load on the joint is when it's at 90 degrees. The weight is furthest, this is called the lever. The weight is furthest from the fulcrum. The fulcrum in this case is the joint, right? So in this case, it's closer to the joint, right? The weight is more medial, it's more proximal. That makes sense? So the strain on the joint here is very low. Strain on the joint here is very high. Strain on the joint here is lesser because this weight is very close to this shoulder, right? The lever is in line. That makes sense? Okay. So we use this a lot. So have you ever heard of a thing called torque? T-O-R-Q-U-E? The closer the weight is to the joint, the less torque it creates. Torque is a good way to hurt yourself. It's a good way to load a muscle, but too much you can produce injury. The further away the joint is, or the weight is from the joint, the more torque it creates. Harder on the joint. So let's say I had a person with shoulder injury. I might have them bend their elbow to do a particular exercise. So I can reduce the torque. Right? I always think there was an infomercial that I saw, I don't know when it was. Some night I couldn't sleep anyway, like 4 in the morning. Anyway, ex-Olympian gymnast selling some product, 2-pound ball. The 2-pound ball, you can get the best workout of your life. You can have a body that looks like him, right? Using this 2-pound ball. If I take 2 pounds, you guys all know this, right? If I take 2 pounds and I hold it close to my chest, the load on the lumbar spine, not too hard. But if I take that 2 pounds and I extend it away from my body, the load on the lumbar spine skyrockets. 18 inches, 24 inches, however long my arm is, 2 pounds at the end, way more load on the spine. Make sense? You guys probably know that's when you're carrying groceries. Or you've got other things. We always want weight close to our body because the load is less. Oh, did I? Oh, sorry. Okay, this got out of order here, so let me just show it to you. So basically, you have a lever system. So your body has, and don't worry about all the first degree, second degree, all that. Here's what I want you to get to know, is that in any lever, think about it like a teeter-totter. Did you guys ever work on a teeter-totter when you were a kid? Okay, okay, like or hate. Hands raised for like. Okay, didn't like. Yeah, depends on who was on the other side, right? Yeah, depends on that. Right, so in a teeter-totter, right, or a seesaw, either way, right, you've got the center either side, boom, 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 right? So in that case, the fulcrum is in the center of the lever, and you've got resistance and effort on either side, depending on which side. Okay, so in that case, that is very similar to a first-class lever, right? This is like a teeter-totter, seesaw, first-class lever. The fulcrum's in the middle. Effort and weight are equally distanced from the fulcrum on either side. Teeter-totter, first-class lever. Okay, so we can alter those a little bit. In a second-class lever, you're going to see that. Where's my? Okay, so that's resistance. Okay, so you're going to see that the resistance is closer to the fulcrum, and then here's the effort, right? So this is more similar to like your ankle, right? So here's the fulcrum is so if I'm getting up on my tippy toes, right? So the fulcrum is the joint out here, and then here is the load, my weight, and here is soleus gastrocnemius that is lifting my heel, which is a little different than the bicep. So in the bicep, the fulcrum is going to be the elbow. Here's the weight right out here. Bicep is doing the work, right? So bicep is doing that effort here. So your body is a system of levers, and those levers can work for us or they can work against us depending on, what it is that we're lifting. So here's how we use these. We shorten or lengthen levers all the time. So again, if I'm doing a plank, right? If I'm doing a plank, right? In this case, my elbows form one point of contact. My feet form the other point of contact. My body in between my elbows and my feet are the lever. If I put my knees down, I've just shortened the lever. So now the elbows are one point of contact. The knees are now more proximal to the elbows. Point of contact is more distal. Point of contact is now more proximal. Make sense? So we can shorten levers to make things easier. Right? or we lengthen levers to make things harder. Okay. So again, this is where biomechanics comes in. You'll start training your eye. What is biomechanically sound? So as we move on in the class, we're going to be doing things where we're going to teach you about bench presses. We're going to teach you about these other things. What's the mechanically sound position? And it's all based on levers. Okay. All right. We'll get more into this when we talk about core training. But basically, we've got different musculature. And that musculature, we divided into two broad categories, local and global. Here's all you need to know. Local musculature are basically things around segmental stabilization. What does that mean? So all the muscles that line your spine. So here's an example of, let me stop sharing for 1 second. Oops. All right, can't do that. Hang on. Image. Okay. So here's an example of, see all these tiny little muscles here? No, that didn't do what I wanted it to. See all these? These are all local stabilizers. So this is what segmental stabilization means. All that area in between your vertebra, tiny segments, right? You know, you've got 33 vertebrae. Basically, each one stacked on top of the other is a segment. Those have to be stabilized. Otherwise, you wind up being, in a, you know, in a windy day, you wind up being, you know, the dancing air thing, right? So all that has to be stabilized, and these are all called local stabilizers. So when we talk about stabilizers, we're really talking about muscles that connect vertebra to vertebra, right? Vertebra to vertebra. When we talk about global stabilizers, we're talking about the larger muscles that initiate movement. So if we come back here, we'd be talking about like basically gluteus maximus. We'd be talking about quadriceps. We'd be talking about hamstrings. We'd be talking about biceps, triceps. So basically these stabilizers, again, are really important. Oh, sorry, let me exit full screen again because I got to share. Are important because they allow us to they allow us to do that movement. Okay. So in these things, we've got these different groups that work together. So I want to go through this kind of quickly here, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But basically, these are muscles that work together. That's what synergistically means, to create tension and to contracting tension to absorb and control ground forces. Ground forces. Every time my foot hits the ground, the earth pushes up back at me, right? First law, one of the laws of physics, right? Classical physics, right? For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I push on the ground, Mother Earth pushes back at me. Make sense? Okay. So if I push with 5 pounds of force, I get 5 pounds of force back. That then has to be absorbed by the body. Any of you runners? Right? If you're a runner, you know, right? Boom, boom, boom. Right? So when you hit that ground, right, you get a lot of force coming back up. And sometimes, you know, you can feel that kind of reverberate through your body. So in this case, we have these muscles that work together. Erector spinae, I just showed you all those deep stabilizers. They're collectively called erector spinae, right? So they help offset biceps femoris, tibialis anterior. So right in walking, right? So I put my foot down, right? So this is a distal to proximal movement, right? My body is working as a brake as I move forward on there. You have the posterior oblique system. So here you have latissimus dorsi. So what I want you to pay attention to here is you're going to have a lot of X's. This is contralateral stabilization. Left side latissimus dorsi, right side gluteus maximus, and you've got the connective tissue in between here. So, right, you've got the thoracolumbar, right? Thoracolumbar, sorry, fascia that's in between here, basically. So this connects these two muscle groups here, right? You have one on the opposite side. Latissimus dorsi comes across and stabilizes the sacroiliac joint. You've got the anterior oblique subsystem. So you've got the external obliques and the adductors. So here again, contralateral, and then we've got contralateral. So these help us to oppose and initiate rotational force production, right? So transverse plane, right? Rotational force production here. Can anybody think about when you use rotational force production? Sports. Use it all the time. Throwing the ball, right? I'm right-handed. I'm going to be more effective throwing if I plant on my left foot, and now I rotate the hips, I rotate the trunk, the hand follows, it becomes a whip, right? That's why I generate that. Javelin, right? Throwing the javelin. Tennis racket, golf swing, any kind of, baseball bat. Any pickleball players? Great game.
And you what?
Pickleball.
No, I've never heard of it.
Oh my God, fantastic game. Particularly if you're in my age group. Awesome game because you have to chase the ball very little. You play with the wiffle ball. So it's very nice. Anyway, so you can see these things, they work in opposition of one another or together to produce movement. So it depends on what's kind of happening.
A good example of that.
Yeah, go ahead.
For like an exercise, right, would be a cable lift. So if you're doing a cable lift,
Yep.
right, or a cable top, right? That would be a good example of those systems working.
Yeah, and that's an excellent example of, as we work, like, so for example, in the 143 class, as we get to the next phase, we're going to be working on these subsystems. So we're going to be working on how do we actively help somebody, because stabilizing your pelvis, that's important. In almost every movement that we do, unstable pelvis, you've got back issues, right? Lateral subsystem. So again, here we're talking about more muscles that are tasked with creating work in the frontal plane and stabilization on there. So these can be both ipsilateral, they can also be contralateral on here. So you've got basically quadratus laborum, and then you've also got gluteus maximus, you've got the adductor. So essentially what you're saying here is we want to stabilize the hip, right? Anteriorly, superior, posteriorly, anteriorly, posteriorly, right? And then also as we turn, and especially as weight bearing, swing leg, weight bearing, swing leg, weight bearing, swing leg. So I want to be able to stabilize those, and those different subsystems help to do that. Okay. All right. I think we're good with all that. All right. We're not going to work too much on this stuff. Okay. I will tell you just a little bit about, okay. So if you go into kinesiology and you decide that you want to get a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, you're going to study motor learning and motor development. It's 3 phases, basically all based on time. Do me a favor, take your pen or pencil, put it in your non-dominant hand, try to write just write your name. Let's just do that. Just write your name with your non-dominant hand. What are you noticing? Is it hard to hold the pencil or pen? What's doing the movement? Is it your fingers? Or are they too busy trying to hold the pen and now you're moving your shoulder or elbow to guide the writing implement to write your name? Right, so it might be the wrist, right? So right now, what you're experiencing is motor control. Your brain is saying, this is a novel task. I haven't done this one before, or I haven't done it in a long time. Yikes, how do I move that pencil or pen to create those letters that I want? So your brain is having to recruit the muscle fiber that it needs to do the job. That's motor control. Have any of you ever done a new skill? And the first time you do it, you're like, yikes, that was bad. Yeah, that's called motor control. That's where your brain is going, okay, I gotta figure this out. But then you practice a few times, and what happens? Yeah, you get better, right? So that's motor learning, right? We practice, and hopefully we practice the movement well, so that we learn the movement well, but that's learning a new skill, right? We also have motor development, thinking about how, if you've ever watched a baby, does it take a baby a long time to learn how to walk, right? We're bipeds, but we don't start out that way, right? We start out as quadrupeds, right? Mostly because we're born with big heads. We got massive heads, right? And body is like, oh, how do I control that thing up there? There's a lot of weight up there, right? So it takes you a while to build the muscular strength and the coordination to hold your head up, keep it where it's supposed to be, so that when you stand up, you're not like, whoa, right? So learning to walk, this is motor development. Walking is a very complex motion. A lot of stuff going on, right? And so it takes time to learn those phases. Go ahead, Dave.
And this is like an important topic, because a lot of the clients that you get to see haven't practiced the squatting, a lunge, a single leg balance. And quite frankly, now we're seeing it. We're seeing it now. I mean, Ellen and I talk about when we get students in the fitness center that didn't get exposed to physical education courses, in the K through 12 system. So now we get them and we say, it might be something that is so easily for you to perform, such as like a squat. Okay, do a squat, and people look at it like, what is a squat? And so it's important for you to understand that it's going to take time, and especially as professionals, as personal trainers, coaches, we tend to want to progress rapidly, right? And through our programs. But it might take a little bit more time for some folks than others. So to be aware of that when you get a new client or a returning client, somebody that you trained, 6 months ago or a year ago, and they stop because financial, because scheduling, whatever it might be. When you bring them back, you have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I in the 143 class I have, and actually when I'm in the fitness center, I work with a lot of students who their motor skills are, I would call them deficient in some ways. And for many of them, they haven't learned that. So that's why elementary school physical education, it can't be about just playing games. It's got to be about movement skills, hopping, skipping, running, throwing, catching, twirling, pivoting. So skipping. We see a lot of students where if you say, okay, skip is opposition, right? Contralateral, opposite arm and leg. And you'll see students where they ipsilateral, right? I mean, it's one form of skipping, but it's not the most efficient form of skipping, right? So learning those skills is important. Okay. You remember the term proprioception? That's basically, how do I know what my body is doing in space? It's trust your feelings, Lou. Right? It's that kinesthetic sense where basically we're taking that information through the sensory system and translating it into knowledge. Right? What's my body doing? Okay. Internal, external feedback, you guys probably know some of those things, right? Internal feedback. I don't know where my fingers are. I know where my fingers are because I'm listening to the feedback from the neural system. My fingers are stretched, muscle spindles are firing, fingers are closed, right? Muscle spindles shortened. So I can listen to that. I can understand what's going on there. That's proprioception, right? That's internal feedback. External feedback is Diego saying, Ellen, your palm is open. Ellen, your palm is closed. Ellen, your palm is open. Right? Something from, or any of you ever use mirrors? Yeah, mirrors, external feedback. I can see what I'm doing. I'm using a different sense to be able to do that. Okay. We're good there. All right, we're going to shift gears. So do me a favor, get up, move around. Gotta get us going again here. Because this is going to get into some nitty gritty. Not that we haven't done that already. All right, let's do this. Let's do a little Russian flight. All right, so I've got opposition, arm and leg. All right, the more I bring the knee up, right, the greater the hip flexion, the greater the stretch on the gluteus muscle. But you, that's good. All right, let's do a little side. A little side kick. Okay, all right. Whew, okay. So now that we've just revved up your metabolism, let's talk about it. So what you just did, change your metabolic rate. Agree or disagree? Yeah, a little bit, right? Yes, Alyssa's got the, just agree. Right? It's a coin flip, it's 50-50, right? Okay, so bioenergetics, big word basically that says, we have the sun, right? Beautiful sun. The sun provides energy to the earth. The plants and animals absorb that energy. They convert it into essentially foodstuffs for us. We consume that energy. We use it or store it after we've digested it. We create waste products. We put those back out into the universe. It's a giant recycler. Make sense? So that's all bioenergetics is. It's the study of how energy is transformed. And our energy all comes from the sun. I was thinking about putting a bumper sticker on myself that says, you know, powered by sunshine. So, yeah, because essentially we all are. Right? We're all powered by sunshine. Isn't it interesting to think that all the water that we have ever had in the universe, I mean, in the world, it's been the same water from the dawn of time. Right? But it's just been recycled over, you know, millions and millions and millions of times. Right? You guys know that? Yeah, it's not like we, you know, we jam out to the universe going, oh, we need more. We're a little low down here, although wouldn't that be nice if we could? Anyway. All right, so we've got metabolism. That's basically, we're talking about chemical reactions. Yeah, feel free to get up. Chemical reactions. You are a giant chemistry experiment, right? Everything that happens in your body is as a result of a chemical reaction. So exercise metabolism is where we've taken your basic metabolic state and we're ramping it up. And there are unique changes that take place as a result of ramping up your metabolism. Okay, so first rule of thermodynamics. If you go into kinesiology, you're going to study physics because the laws of the universe impact us as human beings. So you have to understand some basic physics. Trust me, if I could do it, anybody could do it. Right? I took physics for non-majors. Fantastic class. no numbers, just concepts. It's great. Okay, so energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's only recycled from one form to another. So the banana you eat, the egg that you eat, the glass of juice or water or milk or something that you consume, right? We consume energy, we take it in, and it's either going to be used or it's going to be stored as either glycogen or fat. Right? Does that make sense? So that's the basic laws of the universe. All energy is recycled. It's neither created nor destroyed. The sun is where we get our energy. Okay, does that make sense? So the sun creates all these wonderful things that we end up eating. Grains, animals, plants, herbs. What am I missing? Anything else that's out there, right? So anything that is carbohydrate, fat, protein, right? Those are the three foodstuffs that we eat. We talked about with digestion, right? Saliva, mastication, swallowing, peristalsis. All of that stuff moves that chyme, right? CHYME, moves it through our system. We digest it. We break all those chemical bonds apart, all those chemicals in our stomach and things, they break it all up. Carbohydrate gets broken down into glucose. Fat gets broken down into free fatty acids and triglycerides. Proteins get broken down into amino acids. Everything gets broken down into its smallest molecular unit. Tear it all down. Then we can use those different molecules to create adenosine triphosphate. So this is like going to the bank. You ever going somewhere, let's say you're going to travel someplace. You have US currency. You're going to another country that may or may not take US currency. Right? You have to get what they accept. Right? Real with me on that one? Okay. So it's kind of the same way. Lots of different denominations of money. Got to get them all into the same unit so we can use it. So your body goes through these complex biochemical reactions to get everything stripped down, converted into adenosine triphosphate. It's basically a molecule that we use for energy. That drives our metabolism, it drives our muscular contraction, it drives our thinking, it drives our heart, it drives our respiration, it drives everything that we do. All of those things create heat, carbon dioxide. So right now you are taking in oxygen, even through our N95s. You take in oxygen, you're breathing out CO2. This room has about 20% oxygen. We're at sea level. So of all the air you're breathing in, about 20% of it is oxygen. You might be exhaling, say, 16% oxygen, right? So 4% may have stayed in your body, correct? And then you're using that to produce energy. So basically, you're a carbon dioxide emitter, right? So far, they haven't talked about eliminating humans as a way to deal with global warming, but I'm sure that's probably coming. Right? Who uses carbon dioxide? What living thing on our planet uses carbon dioxide? Plants. Yeah. Green stuff. We like that. Plants, trees. Right? So people plant trees to offset carbon emissions. Right? Make sense? So we like plants. Plants are good things. So you are this giant recycler. Okay. So we have nutrients. Basically, all of the foods that we eat, they get from what they start as to an intermediate and then to ATP. So the intermediate stage for carbohydrates is glycogen or glucose. right? So glucose, actually, I should say glycogen is stored glucose, right? So glucose is a molecule, and we can store it as a slightly different molecule. But basically, they're interchangeable, right? Where do you store glycogen, right? Because you eat your bananas, you eat your fruits, you eat your vegetables, you eat your complex carbohydrates, you eat all that stuff. Where does your body store that glycogen, that glucose? Say again?
Your bloodstream.
Liver. Liver is a good place to store it. Muscle. Muscle's going to be using it. Your muscle has stores. Anybody ever heard of carbohydrate loading? Right, so people who are marathoners, ultra marathoners, those folks oftentimes will carbo load before a big event. And what they're looking to do, there's a process you can go through where you can kind of drain your glycogen stores and then ingest a bunch of carbohydrates. And you can do that repeatedly to try to improve the muscle storage of glycogen. Glycogen is a good thing because you know when you run out. When you run out, you are spent. Any of you ever exercise to a place where you're just, I got nothing. I got nothing left in the tank, right? Sometimes we call that bonking, B-O-N-K, right? Oh, I got nothing left in the tank. So what do? You drink Gatorade, right? Or you get a banana or you something, right? You got to refuel that, right? So you got to get some carbohydrates in there. Okay, fats get broken down into triglycerides and free fatty acids. We're not going to worry a lot about protein. Here's what I really want you to think about protein. By the way, glycogen, glucose, 4 calories per gram. Fat, 9 calories per gram. Great form of energy. Twice as much as carbohydrate. But it takes longer to get to it. So we're not going to worry about protein. Here's what I want you to think about protein. Protein is building up, right? Remember how we talked about catabolic, right? Right, something is catabolic, right? It means to build up, right? So we want to build muscle. So if I want to build muscle, it's like building a house. Amino acids are like different kinds of bricks. I can build my house using those amino acids. So protein is really not used as an energy source. It rarely supplies energy, but it can under certain circumstances. So ketosis is one of those. So that's a whole different metabolic state. You may find persons that you're working with who are diabetics, particularly type 1 diabetics, that may fall into ketosis, and that's not good. That can be kind of dangerous on here. Okay. So here's our friend, adenosine triphosphate, right? This is ATP, right? We cannot perform any mechanical work without ATP. Got to have it. So whether you ate a steak, or you ate some chicken, or you ate carbohydrates, you ate pasta, or you ate a peanut butter and banana sandwich on whole wheat bread, chocolate milk, right? So spinach, kale, lettuce, right? Any kind of carbohydrate, any kind of protein, any kind of fat gets broken down into ATP. And then that ATP is what is used for you to think thoughts, breathe, heart to beat, muscles to move your skeleton. All the energy that we expend is in the form of ATP. So how does this happen? Here's our friend ATP, adenosine triphosphate, 3 phosphate molecules. When one phosphate molecule breaks off, energy is released, that's the energy we use for muscular contraction. So what we're left over with is ADP, 2-phosphates. This one has now been broken off that release that energy. So all of the systems we're going to talk about, there are 3 energy systems. Their job is to take ADP and convert it back into ATP. And your body has 3 different ways that we do that. So basically, if I have ATP, it gets broken down into ADP, and then it's got to be restored, right? Because we said energy is neither created nor destroyed. It's recycled. Make sense? If I use it, I got to restore it. Use it, restore. Use, restore. Use, restore. And that restoring is done in 3 different energy systems. So your body has 3 different ways to restore that ATP and to use it. Which system you use is dependent on the task that you are doing. Is it a short, high energy task? Or is it a lower energy, longer term task? That make sense? Have any of you ever worked out in different ways and you have found that that impacts how hungry you are after, or the kinds of food that you want? Is that making sense to anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, give me an example, Aiden.
After like an intense workout that I do, I want carbs or like protein or like some kind of.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, if we actually listened to our hypothalamus, we'd be doing okay. How many of you ignored it on the Super Bowl? Right, you know? Yeah, I did. Yeah. It's the only time I really eat potato chips, but damn, they're good, right? Yeah. Anyway, way too many. Anyway, all right. So your body has 3 different ways that it replaces this ATP. And so as the exercise physiologist, the trainer, you have to have some understanding of this so you can help your client when they are talking about, I want to lose weight. I want to reduce my body fat. I want to increase my muscle mass. Because you're gonna have to know how to train these systems. So remember, like 1,000 years ago when we started this class, we were talking about a person's goal, right? So if my goal is to improve my oxygen consumption, I have to train this system. The other 2 need to be trained as well, but this is my primary one. Let's say that I'm a mixed martial artist, or I am a basketball player, or I'm some kind of an athlete where I stop and start, stop and start, stop and start. I have to train this middle system. If I'm a power lifter, I'm going to be training this creatine system. So the type of activity that I do will guide me as a trainer, which of these systems, and generally it's all 3, but which of these systems do I need to focus on? So I coached basketball for many years, and this is in the days where there were no Diegos in those days, right? There were no strength and conditioning coaches. You were the head coach, the bus driver, the bottle washer, the psychologist, the bus driver, I think I already said that, the trainer, you did it all. Right? You did it all. So I had to learn about this stuff so I could train the basketball team. Because basketball is anaerobic activity, right? I could jump for a rebound. I got to sprint. In an aerobic environment, it's a 40-minute game. Heart rate's going to be elevated for 40 minutes. So I had to figure out how am I going to train my athletes to be able to be really solid when they need to be. So we have these three systems. First one's called the ATP PCR system. So this is basically an energy system that provides short duration, high intensity work by replenishing ATP rapidly, and it uses creatine phosphate. Anybody ever heard of creatine phosphate as a supplement? Right? Why do people take creatine phosphate? Right? So the more creatine phosphate I have around, in theory, right? Although too much can be a problem. But creatine is used also to recover, improve my ability to do these short, quick, burst, explosive movements. Diego, do you ever have students that use creatine or?
In terms of mainly power lifters or people that lift heavy weights. And the team, this is a question that always gets asked. You know, should I take a creatine supplement, right? And that's like, why do you want to take a creatine supplement, right? And that's usually what starts the conversation. Well, I feel like I don't get enough of X. I feel like I feel like when we do legs or when we do such workout, I feel like this, you know. So main thing with creatine, it holds and brings it holds a lot of water, right? So therefore it retains a lot of water. So in the long run or in short term, it helps you feel more replenished, right? But as we can see here, this system is working at a way different level than just a supplement. And the majority, 95 to 99% of the creatine that you're going to take in a supplement, you're going to pee it out.
Yeah.
Right. Your body's not going to want to. It just can't accept that much, and there's not enough studies, you know, that show that is, you know, it's safe and effective in terms of that.
I was laughing about my oldest nephew. He was a college student at that time at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So he's staying for the weekend, and I know he's just got this little baggie of, you know, white powder. I'm like, let's talk. So it's creatine. Okay. So anyway, so we I said, so why are you taking creatine? He says, you know, I just want to kind of increase my, you know, muscle mass and my, you know. I said, what kind of training do you do? Oh, I don't do any. I said, well, yeah, that was another conversation. So anyway, but
So what's the difference between creatine phosphate and creatine monohydrate?
chemical, right? So basically, creatine monohydrate is going to have one hydrogen, right, on it. So I couldn't tell you the biochemistry of all that, but basically that's the difference on there is phosphate, I think, is probably going to have a different chemical structure. And it would probably have to do with phosphorus versus hydrogen. I'd have to look it up. But that would be my guess. Is that the chemical, the biochemical structure is probably slightly different. Whether one's better or not, I don't know.
And I mean, just to chime in on that, your body's so, and as we are seeing in the last 5-6 weeks, so efficient at creating all these systems, you know, so you're better off, you know, getting a good nutrition, you know, a balanced nutrition, you know, pointing your clients in the right direction than taking all these supplements, you know, that we still don't know their efficacy,
Yeah.
you know, and that it can start putting a dent in somebody's wallet.
Yeah.
You know, as we move on, so.
And side effects as well. Anybody know where you can get creatine phosphate naturally? Meat. High quality proteins. Yeah. High quality proteins are where you're going to get that. So supplements, you know, I mean, my guess is most of you probably have plenty of creatine anyway. But creatine comes from meat products. Yeah. Okay. So we are going to call it a day on that. But you know, Friday, Monday, holidays on here. So we posted lab 4 And let me show you that. Lab 4 is, or sorry, Lab 5, my mistake, is posted. Okay. All right, stop. So that is posted. Where did my camera go? So we'll probably go ahead and I'll probably push this back. We were going to do some stuff on nutrition next week, but we've got a lot of this biochemistry to get through. So we'll probably push this back to maybe like the 23rd in terms of that due date on there. So on next week, we're going to finish off with these energy metabolisms, and then we'll talk a little bit about total energy needs, like what do you need every day in terms of total calories and those kinds of things. So, okay, on that note, make sure everybody gets a high five or some kind of an elbow from your friends there. Any questions on any of this stuff? So we're just, as you know, we're throwing a ton at you. We get it that this is a lot. So look at these things, review them, try to use this terminology, and then we're going to start putting all this stuff into practice when we do assessments, and then how do you train people? Okay. All right. On that note, please enjoy your weekend. Be safe out there.